Good afternoon, everybody, and thank you for inviting me again for the second time to speak here. Through a slight communication problem, I didn't realize actually that I was supposed to, what I was supposed to speak about until yesterday, so forgive me if I'm slightly unprepared and if I slightly deviate from the topic. I believe that the topic is career planning, and I think that basically by discussing a little bit what we do and where we are at with Dressage, it slightly brings it into the topic anyway. I'd like to start off with a couple of statistics. They're not 100% accurate, so please don't quote me too much on them, but through a little bit of sort of verbal research this morning, we discovered that the average percentage of the dressage riders in Finland has risen from around the 66% mark in less than 2 years, which I think, if you relate that to progress in graphics, is a huge and a significant improvement. In 2011, Finland had a team that represented Finland at the European Championships, and there were 4 qualified riders, and those were the team. This year at the World Equestrian Games, we had 6 riders qualified, and we actually had the luxury of having to choose a team, which I think, if you think about statistics, and I don't know, and I did try and find out the number of registered dressage riders that are in the federation compared to, for example, England. In England we have over 15,000 registered dressage riders with the federation, and we only had 11 riders qualified for the World Championships that came into contention for the team. So I think that puts it a little bit in perspective of the rise of the sport in the country. And yes, Finland is a small country, and yes, the numbers, for those of you who listened to Rob this morning, the numbers are laughably different in the amount of horses, the amount of riders, the amount of competitors. But I think what is impressed me so much in the time that I've been coming here is that, you know, David fought Goliath and won. And I think the same can happen. It's not just about numbers. I think what impressed me so much about my time that I spent here in Finland is the insane drive to succeed, and the incredible positive attitude of certainly of all the riders, 99.9% of the riders that I've worked with. There is a really incredibly positive flow, and I think that shows in the progress. It shows in the progress of the riders. The quality of the horses that are being produced are not always the best quality in the world, and that is something that we have to live with. That is a long process, that is development. And I will come back to that point later, but I think that what I find at the moment in Finland is that there is an incredibly positive wave that is developing about the sport of dressage in this country. And I think it showed a little bit at the World Championships. We were a country that fielded the team of the oldest horses there, and I think almost the oldest horses ever that made up the team. I would be interested to know the combined age of our horses in Finland. But what I think, and of all the people that I've spoken to, I think what impressed so much was the quality of the riding. And there were still some of our best riders that weren't even there, that didn't have horses. So I think that is all very, very sort of encouraging for the future of the sport in this country, and I think it is something that we really all have to now focus on, that there is this wonderful wave of positivity going on. The sport is consistently developing and is consistently improving, And this is the time that you have to now start not resting on your laurels and start having to make change. This is when the time comes where you actually have to say, we have got a brilliant, positive, forward way of going. The horses are improving, the riders are improving. Now is the time that we have to take the bull by the horns, and we have to say, now we have to take what we have and we need to start building on a long-term future. It would be unrealistic for us to expect to have a team in Rio, because we do not have the horse calendar yet. If you think that to get into the special, just to qualify for the special at the World Games, you need well over 70%. And that these days requires a huge amount of horsepower. It requires a tremendous difference of quality of horses than we have got at the moment to our, that are working at Grand Prix level. However, on a positive note, we have got several of the Finnish riders with young up-and-coming horses that are of the quality that we can hopefully later on achieve that result with. But our goal was always to try and get a team qualified for the Olympic Games. But your goals have always got to remain realistic. You've got to set your goals and make sure that they are reachable. It is to do with both the national feeling that you don't feel, that people don't feel cheated. There's no point in going on saying, we are going to go to the Olympics, we are going to have a team. And then when you don't achieve that result, people will say, well, why didn't you achieve it? Then you have to start making explanations. Our dream is to achieve a team that will go to the Olympics, but we have to be realistic, and it's a sport where so much depends on the quality of our horses. And we are doing everything in our power to make sure that we keep on increasing the quality of our horses. We have, for example, at the moment in discussion, and I'm not even sure whether I'm allowed to make this public, but I'm going to, we are in discussion to develop a new program in Finland. We haven't given it a name yet, but it is a program where we are going to hopefully start. And it was so interesting this morning in a meeting, we discussed the whole program, and then Rob spoke about exactly that program that we want to develop here. And it was almost word for word what we said this morning before we even spoke. It's about developing, trying to develop a program of recognizing the best quality horses and riders in the country, and taking them forward in a way that we can influence as a body from the federation, whether we can influence them as riders to help with their education. The one sad thing about that is that Rob had the luxury of Rabobank. He said Rabobank quite casually. I wish you actually knew the figures of Rabobank. It is a vast and enormous amount of money that sponsor delivers to the program every year, and we don't have that. And that does make a difference. You can say what you want. If you look at the progress of England, my own country, in the sport, money makes a difference. It wasn't until we got lottery funding. Of course, it is combined with expertise and knowledge and leadership, but the money does make a huge difference. And what we are going to try and achieve with this program, that is that we can start at least recognizing talent both in horses and in riders, and see if we can find ways as we go along of nurturing that talent. It is no good just identifying it. The real art of progress is to nurture talent, whether it be in a horse or in a rider. It doesn't mean to say that we are going to look at horses that don't have any potential whatsoever, but I think what we really need to do is we need to start developing what we call a pyramid system in this country. A program like this does not only involve athletes for future sport, but it should hopefully also involve coaching, training, that trainers who train other people get involved, that we develop a system that is unilateral throughout the country. Rob spoke about it this morning, quite interesting, about the cowboy trainers that you have in absolutely every single country. That is, without a doubt, they are all there. To, at this stage, develop a coaching certificate in a country like this is a process that will take time. In the meantime, what we, I think, are all obliged to do, as if we want to have longevity of the sport in this country, is to try and make sure that we try and influence all the people that train other people, that we have one line of thinking, that we all think along the same lines, because that is when you stop confusion. That is when riders can actually start being involved in the discussion of where they go with their career. We were talking about it this morning as well, that so much as a few years ago, it was more a question of, and somebody brought up, I can't even remember who it was, that said that it was more hobby riders doing Grand Prix dressage. Whereas now it is a sport, and it is a sport that is starting to make itself known on the international circuit as a nation. We have, of course, in Finland's history, the great Kira Kekkonen, who obviously put the country on the map, but she was an individual. And what we're now starting to find is that we're starting as a nation to develop a name, not just one rider, but a group of riders that are starting to be recognized as an entity. And what we have to try and do is make sure that we start developing in this country a national system of training, and that hopefully being the correct system of training. There are many roads that lead to Rome, and I think you can probably put the 10 top trainers of the world in one room, and they could probably have 10 different ways of achieving the same result. So it's not saying that there's one way and that should be everybody's way, but that there is a unilateral way of thinking that hopefully produces the same end results in horses. And that comes also that if you start having a program like this that also involves the riders a little bit, to the point that they, as a rider, you should at some point start taking your own decisions. I spent many years of my life as a rider with one trainer, and it worked incredibly well for me. But it did come to a point where I felt the decisions that were being made for me were not the right decisions. Fortunately, I had a great trainer that had the maturity to then sit and listen to my discussions, and we discussed. And he started accepting because I trained with him for 12 years, when we started training, the training was, you do as I say, and that's the end of it, no discussion. And I was happy to accept that, because as a trainer, the one thing that you do is you take on the responsibility. You take on the responsibility, sadly, in most cases, only of failure, because success very, very rarely gets pointed back to the trainer. However, it is enormously important that as a trainer, you take the responsibility, and therefore as a rider, that's an enormous luxury. It's a luxury that you don't have to think about what you're doing. You have to not think about what you're doing, but that you have the luxury of concentrating and focusing on your individual time with your horse. We had a situation at this year's World Games where a rider was particularly nervous at the beginning of the working in. And I said to her, forget everything. What you do now is, you don't have to think. I'm going to think for you. I'm going to direct you. I'm going to tell you, this is what you're going to do. That's how you're going to do it. This is when you're going to do it. And it worked magically. The whole, within a very short period of time, the rider relaxed, the horse relaxed, and they went out and they did a personal best performance. So, as a rider, it is very important that at some point that you start, however, making your own decisions, that you do take on the responsibility yourself as well. And to tie it all in, that is why I want to introduce this program to Finland, so that we can start influencing more and more the coaches that also train the riders in the interim periods, so that the riders can also have a very open, and that we develop a very form of open discussion, that everybody can talk along the same lines. It's dressage. Nobody ever agrees on anything. It's a fact. We don't agree with the judges don't agree with us, the training, one trainer doesn't agree with another. It's just a fact. Dressage is a sport that is subjective. You might have one favorite horse, you might have another favorite horse, and I have my own favorite horse. If you look at the top horses in the world, every person has a type of horse that they like, and that is basically the long and the short of our sport. It is a subjective sport. It is a sport where you are always going to have different opinions. What is the most important thing is that the people in charge of the sport, and in this case in Finland, the people who are in charge of our sport, of dressage in this country, make sure that we have the interest of the long-term development of the sport at heart, that we think about what is the picture going to be in the next 3, 5, 8, 10 years' time. Those are not always evident in the beginning. They are not always a very successful or very popular short-term plan. Many times myself have I said to a rider that, in my opinion, this is the road we have to go down with this specific horse. And I could see the rider thinking, you must be out of your tiny mind. This is not exactly what I want to do. But for those who then trust you as a trainer, we go down that route, because I have hopefully enough experience to know that at the end of the road, there is the result there. And then when it comes to career planning as a rider, the most important thing is that you need the correct amount of support. You need to be able to have that confidence in your trainer, in your federation, in your team manager, to be able to say, okay, if that's what you feel is the best, then let's go for it. Short term, it might not always be what you want. What was really evident for me, for those of you who listened to Rob speak this morning, is the dialogue that they have, and the amount of emphasis that they put on team spirit and all of that. And then at the same time, he said, but I make the decisions. I say what goes. I say who goes to a competition, who doesn't go to a competition. So I'm really interested to know how that works in a team spirit situation, because God knows, I know in my experience, if you say to one rider, you will not go to that show, team spirit is not always that great. So it's about the dynamics, and it's about the creating a balance and creating the right dynamics in an organization, such as the organization of Dressage in Finland. It is about having a healthy and open and honest dialogue between riders, federation, and trainers. Without that, you don't have anything. Now, I know again, this is dressage, the amount of times I've told myself, bloody hell, I'm sitting on a world champion here because I've had one good ride, when really in my heart of hearts, I actually know he ain't ever going to be a world champion. And it's about, as a rider, the most difficult thing is, when you ride on a day-to-day basis, is to actually genuinely be honest with yourself. It is so easy. Dressage, when you do it on a day-to-day basis, can so easily lead you down a fantasy path. I've won 78 gold medals in my indoor school. There was never anybody to judge or see me, but I won them, believe me, in my own mind. However, put that in the ring and it's a very different matter. And the most important thing as an athlete is to have the ability to be honest with yourself. That can have two effects. It can have an effect of thinking, what am I doing? Maybe I'm unrealistic. Or it can have the feeling of drive. And that is what separates the good from the not so good. If you have the ability to, as an athlete, to be honest with yourself and say, these are my weak areas, this is what I need to work on, these are my strong points. A lot of athletes, it's a very individual sport. The sport of dressage, you're in that arena and you are being judged by 7 judges and however many thousand people are watching you. When you jump a show jumping round, you're not being judged. You're being clapped at when you go over the fences, and you're being, when you knock one down. Much easier. When you're a dressage rider, you are being judged, whether you like it or not, by every single person that watches you. Even the most ignorant of people judge you. My mother never saw me ride until I was selected for the Olympic Games in 1992. My mother has never in her life, actually until that point, seen a live horse, let alone touch one. She watched me ride 2 weeks before the Olympics. They came over to watch. And I was riding my second horse, my up-and-coming horse, who also happened to be the laziest horse in the entire world. And my mother, who had absolutely zero knowledge about the sport, said to me, "Darling, is he supposed to drag his hind legs in the ground?" At which point I could gladly have hit her. However, it proves my point. You are being judged, even by your own mother, 2 weeks before the Olympics. So the point I'm trying to make is that it's a lonely place to be. As a rider, as a dressage rider, no matter how much backup, no matter how much support you have from the federation, from a trainer, from a husband, a wife, a boyfriend, a girlfriend, a friend, it's a lonely place to be because nobody knows what goes on between you and that horse for the hour, 40, 30 minutes that you ride that, except you and the horse. So it can be a very lonely place to be, and it can be a place that really plays with your mind a lot. You can get a feeling that you think, this feels great. Somebody can tell you, sorry, but it looks like shit. You can think, this just doesn't feel right. And somebody comes and says, whoa, good one. And that is a little bit, what I'm trying to say with that is that it's a difficult place to be when you think you have to be on a daily basis honest with yourself, honest with the caliber of horse that you have, honest about your own performance. Your riding ability should not come into that at this stage. Your riding ability should be confirmed, but you should always ask and question yourself about what situation you're in. And as I said, that is what separates good riders from very good riders. The very good riders use that as inspiration, use that as a driving force, use that as a way of improving, we use that as a way of getting better, use it in an analytical way to discuss with themselves and hopefully then their trainers and their backup groups as well of how to make better, how to improve that. The not so good riders are the ones who make them lose their confidence. And that happens. It's happened to me in the past where you go for a period without a top horse, you produce a secondary horse that isn't possibly a top horse, you're thinking, is it really that good? Yeah, I'm still going to give it a go. You're not quite so honest with yourself. You go to a competition, you get an average mark, you think, maybe I'm an average rider. And then it starts eating away at your confidence. And this is where, as a rider, you have to have, that ability to be totally realistic with yourself, and to have the ability to stand back and look at the bigger picture of the sport and say to yourself, so I might not have the best horse at the moment, I might not be right at the top of the world, but it's not going to take my confidence away. I'm going to see if I can improve this horse to the best of its ability, to the best of where it can go, and let's see where we go from there. That ability to be honest with yourself also then comes into a little bit the facet of the group that you surround yourself with. In career planning, the worst decisions I have ever made as a rider, as a trainer, as a businessman, because you also have to run this as a business. Very, very few riders have the luxury of being just a rider. They also have to run a business. It's a massively expensive sport. Nobody funds it. The days of big sponsors, I think personally in our sport, are over. I don't know very many riders that still have big sponsors. It is due to the economical situation of the world that we live in as well, but I think it's also a little bit the direction that the sport has gone. So most people have to fund themselves. And the worst decisions I've made is because I've been surrounded by the wrong people and didn't have, A, at the time, the guts to distance myself from those people, or B, not even realizing it. And I think as a career choice that you make, you also have to constantly make sure that you yourself, as an athlete, are surrounded by the correct backup people. And you have to have the kahunas to actually change that if it isn't right. As I say, I can only speak from personal experience, but I've also seen this in a lot of people that I train, that when they make changes in their backup group of people that they surround themselves with, how much it changes for the better, or in some cases, how much it changes for the worse. I can tell you a classic example. A para rider that I'd been training for 6 years, together with her own coach, achieved huge and enormous success and had won enormous amount of gold medals, European, world and Olympic gold medals. Decided after London to change her backup group. She had a huge amount of publicity, national television, national newspaper press, and became a celebrity, a minor celebrity. Very successful because a charming and very pretty girl with quite a lot to say for a young girl, it has to be said. However, in changing what at that stage was a formula that worked extremely well, and has basically led her to a huge amount of international success. Because of personal circumstances changing, I think the ability to look at herself and be honest with herself in this situation became clouded. She changed trainers, she changed yards, she changed nearly everything in her life, and the success has gone right down the drain. She is no longer at that level of success that she was. And no matter how much I tried to convince her at the time of saying, you're very young, wait, you are riding the crest of the wave at the moment, stick to what you've got, have the ability to say, so personally, this maybe doesn't work for me that much anymore. But then is the question as a rider and as an athlete of any sort that you should have the maturity of saying, well, I'll step out of it from one aspect of it, but maintain the professional side of it, what it was. And I think she would have gone on to win the gold again this year. She didn't. Still the same horse, still the same quality of riding, but a totally different backup group, which in my opinion was the wrong decision to do. And in fact it proved itself in the results. It is, as a career rider, sometimes the most difficult decisions that you have to make is changing trainers, having to make decisions about moving stables sometimes, 110,000 things, changing feed companies, all sorts of things that you have to do. And what you have to have the ability to do as a professional athlete is to make sure that before you make any change that you have a complete honest discussion with yourself and say, is this the right decision for me at the time? And even though sometimes that your heart tells you, this is the right decision for me, this is what I want, sometimes you have to then sit down, look at it on paper, write it down, the pros, the cons, and then maybe let your head do the thinking more than your heart at times, because it is incredibly important that you have, as a career, as a rider with a career, that you have a consistency. It is all about consistency. If you look at probably one of the best and most successful dressage riders of all times, and you look and you follow her career from beginning to end, Isabelle Wert, there has been no time in that woman's career where she's dropped off the radar. She's maybe not won gold again and again and again, but she has never dropped off the radar. She has always been there. She has changed trainers in that time 4 times, maybe. She has changed backup group. She's got married. She's had a baby. Her personal life has changed enormously. But her ability, I think, as an athlete, to be so single-minded and so focused on what her actual goal is to achieve is so exemplary that I think absolutely everybody and any athlete in the world can look at her as an example of how to be a good and successful athlete because of the consistency. And that is a girl that went to university and studied a law degree alongside her career as a rider, and still always been in the top 5 in the world. And I think that what we can, and what as riders you learn from that, most of all, is consistency. And when you have circumstantial changes in your life, to not let that take away from the focus of the end goal, what it is that you want to achieve. So on that example, I think I will call it a day, because I can go on and on and on and on, and I can actually bore you to tears in the end. But I think probably a few of the topics that I raised could be slightly controversial, so I would be quite happy to discuss with you, any of you, if you wish to discuss or have a question. Great. Thank you very much.